Good morning, and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. It's my pleasure to be here this morning, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join me. Beginning another week here at Inquisition Update, exposing the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, a global kingdom for the Pope. An earthly kingdom, the counterfeit kingdom that is prophesied in the Bible, and one of the best authors in exposing this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order is P.D. Stewart, and he's written a two-part, two-volume series entitled Codeword Barbelon. This one that we're reading and discussing is the second of that two-book series, and it is subtitled Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again. Now, Friday, at the end of the broadcast, we were talking about the failed state of California. And the premise, I think, that the author is driving at is that California kind of led the way. The first indication. Okay, we're still having connection problems. My apologies to the listeners. If you'll bear with us while we try to resolve these issues, we'll continue. Talking about California, Friday on the broadcast before we dismissed for the weekend. And California is just a prelude, implied by the author at least, that California was a prelude to what would happen to the rest of the states of the nation. The United States was going to collapse financially. And the author writes, we're going to back up a paragraph or so from where we finished Friday for continuity purposes. He says, writes Paul Harris of The Observer, quote, the state that was once held up as the epitome of the boundless opportunities of America, speaking of California, has collapsed. From its politics to its economy to its environment and way of life, California is like a patient on life support. At the start of summer, the state government was so deeply in debt that it began to issue IOUs instead of wages. Its unemployment rate has soared to more than 12%, the highest figure in 70 years. The crisis is so deep that Professor Kevin Starr, who has written an acclaimed history of the state, recently declared, quote, California is on the verge of becoming the first failed state in America. If it was an independent country, it would be in the G8. And if it were a company, it would likely be declared bankrupt, unquote. The state has lost virtually all hope of President Obama, declaring, quote, California is too big to fail, unquote. California is merely symptomatic of the desperate situation facing all of America and the rest of us, too. This is the world's biggest crisis. According to Goldman Sachs, the United States debt will soon be 85% of the U.S. economy. In August of 2009, Deutsche Bank reported that 40% of homeowners in America find themselves with mortgages that exceeded the equity on their properties. For instance, the mortgages exceeded the value of their homes. A Wikipedia stat, not the most reliable but still sufficiently accurate, states that the estimated U.S. debt per household, including unfunded services, is $59.1 trillion, or $516,000 per household as of November 2008. In the words of Kevin Phillips, author of American Theocracy, quote, all that adds up to is a mess, unquote. A big one, says P.D. Stewart. As of January 2010, 1 in 8 Americans live off food stamps, including 1 in 4 children. America is, in essence, well on its way to becoming a third world nation. And I'll comment about that. It says America has all the symptoms of a patient taking a last gasp. That's the intent of the Vatican, to reduce this once Protestant nation to third world nation status, resembling the status of Europe during the Middle Ages when the Pope ruled supreme. The world that the Vatican controls is the third world. Protestantism raised the affluence and wealth of mankind, and America was the epitome of Protestantism until Rome got control of our government, which some would argue was near the very founding of this nation. Now it's time for America to take its place among the third world nations. Remember, the Pope is redistributing the world's wealth and creating a new social order. The whole intent is to bring the United States under Vatican control by one means or another. And one of those means is by financial collapse. It's all been orchestrated. Now, continuing with the text, it says, the only reason America has not yet collapsed is because of the size of its mammoth economy and the goodwill it has around the world. But today, the United States faces a very real prospect of utter financial collapse. A person, a corporation, or a state that cannot pay its debts will eventually go bankrupt. It's no different with a nation. Professor Lawrence J. Kotlikoff, chairman of the Department of Economics at Boston University, estimates the United States has an unfunded liability, listen to this, of $72 trillion with a T dollars and no way to pay it. Read it again. No way to pay it. America is broke, reader, and broken. The nation has eaten its seed corn, and it can now look with certainty for many miserable, horrible, evil years ahead. This is regrettable, but true. Our Roman system has collapsed. That's what's wrong with America. We've failed to follow God's law, and we've followed the counterfeit Roman financial system. The whole world has. And now the whole world is being brought to its knees. Who ever said God's law was dead? Now, the beginning of the next page shows a photograph, the familiar image that we all see on the television of the Federal Reserve Bank printing out Federal Reserve notes as fast as the machinery can run. The caption under the photograph says, "In the meantime, to delay the inevitable, America will continue to print more monopoly money." That's right, monopoly money. It's not backed by gold or silver or anything else. It's just paper and ink. And each note represents a debt, as do most notes. You go to the bank to borrow a car, you take out a note on a car, on a loan. Each Federal Reserve note is a unit of debt. Now, the heading for the next portion is entitled, "And the Rest of the World." Remember, this New World Order is a global kingdom. The whole world has to be brought to its knees. It has to be brought to the feet of the Pope, the biblical Antichrist, the one who will usurp Christ's throne. And it begins with a quote, "As goes America, so goes the world," unquote, is the old saying. Speaking of the current economic morass that threatens to take the nations of the world into the abyss, George Soros said, quote, "The financial system has effectively disintegrated, with the turbulence more severe than that during the Great Depression, and the decline comparable to the fall of the Soviet Union," unquote. We can take Mr. Soros' word on this subject as prophecy, for already the financial meltdown has, quote-unquote, annihilated, to use Hollywood language, some of the oldest and largest investment banks in the world, and plunged the global economy into an almost vertical downspin. Paul Volcker, a former Federal Reserve chairman and a great admirer of George Soros, said that he, Volcker, could not remember any time, even in the Great Depression, when things went down so fast and quite so uniformly around the world. Jim Rogers, one of the world's foremost international investors, declared that, quote, presently, most big U.S. banks are totally bankrupt, unquote. If the banks collapse, the whole economy of the United States, and by parity of the rest of the developed world, would descend into financial and social chaos. Isn't that what we want? A new social order. That's what the Vatican wants, a Roman Catholic social order. Okay. Are we back? Apparently we are. Again, we are having technical difficulties this morning. I hope my listeners will bear with us as we work on the problem, and hopefully we can continue and get through the program. We were talking about Paul Volcker, a former Federal Reserve chairman and a great admirer of George Soros, said that he, Volcker, could not remember any time, even in the Great Depression, when things went down so fast and quite so uniformly around the world. Jim Rogers, one of the world's foremost international investors, declared that presently most big United States banks are totally bankrupt. If the banks collapse, the whole economy of the United States, and by parity of the rest of the developed world, would descend into financial and social chaos. All financial markets would grind to a halt and implode. And how best to choreograph society, the social order, than to bring it into upheaval. You know, the Freemasonic motto is order out of chaos. To get the order that they desire, that is Roman Catholic social order, imposing Roman Catholic social doctrine on the world, they must bring the social order into chaos. And the best way to do that is to bring down the world financially. And that's exactly what they're doing. Now, the author continues. He says, subprime debt has already resulted in a loss to the Western markets of $60 trillion. And a further $1 quadrillion is missing from the world economy, hidden somewhere in toxic subprime and related mortgage debts. According to the Bank of International Settlements, the notional value of all outstanding derivatives of subprime mortgages, for instance, financial derivative transactions or loans, now totals approximately $1.144 quadrillion. In layman's language, that means the banks continue to have a global exposure in financial derivatives that surpasses $1 quadrillion. And a second wave of economic tsunami is still to come, the commercial mortgage foreclosures. Why should that alarm you? That's more than 1 million piles of money with $1 billion in each pile. Reader, bar divine intervention, nothing can stop the juggernaut of economic destruction that, like a runaway freight train, is heading toward the precipice. That's right. Nothing short of divine intervention. That's what it's going to take. And who is likely to gain divine intervention? but God's people. But it can hardly be said that God's people even understand the cause of this financial crisis, and that's why P.D. Stewart is writing this book, and that's why I'm reading it. He continues, he says, there is a prophecy in the book of Revelation, chapter 18, verses 10 through 20, that seems to speak to this train of events. Quote, alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all fine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, that is, Babylon, the Antichrist system, shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, and purple, and scarlet, and decked with gold, and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And they cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. There's your divine intervention. Destruction for this Roman financial system. It will come by God's hands. God is the only one who can bring it down. God's people are practically oblivious. I hope my listeners, after listening to Inquisition Update regularly for a period of time, you know better. But for the vast majority of Christians today, they don't have a clue where their destruction is coming from. We've repudiated God's law. We've said it's dead, crucified with Christ. So we've adopted this Roman usury system. And now we are a slave to our creditor. And who is that creditor? But the Pope, the biblical Antichrist. And this passage that we just read describes her in vivid, living color, purple and scarlet, decked with gold and silver and precious stones and pearls. And guess what? She has a golden cup in her hand, full of the filthiness of the abomination of her abominations. It's speaking of none other than the Roman Catholic Church. The world has made an image of the Roman whore, mystery, Babylon the Great, and now it's come crumbling down. The author continues, in 1989, Benjamin Krem, the self-proclaimed spokesman for the demonic entity Lord Maitreya, was interviewed by journalist Patricia Pitchon. Purporting to speak on behalf of Maitreya, Krem told Patricia Pitchon, quote, humanity needs to be up against it and desperate, and that shock will certainly be sharp and will bring humanity to its senses, and the governments, in some cases, to their knees, and all their priorities will change, unquote. That message from Maitreya, channeled through Benjamin Creme, was the voice of Lucifer, also known as the devil. Now, we were quoting this demonic soothsayer, Benjamin Creme, who is quoting this satanic spirit called Lord Maitreya. Now, earlier we talked about the Vatican using this financial collapse or orchestrating this financial collapse to create a need for a new social order, to impose Roman Catholic social doctrine upon the world as a solution for this global collapse. Now, with that in mind, listen to what Creme says. Now, he is a channeler for this satanic entity known as Lord Maitreya. Here's what he says, quote, "Humanity needs to be up against it and desperate, and that shock will certainly be sharp and will bring humanity to its senses and the governments, in some cases, to their knees, and all their priorities will change," unquote. Is this the desperate situation that Rome has brought us up against with this financial collapse? Are we not listening to two different interpreters of the same satanic message? This obviously satanic entity, Lord Maitreya, is simply reiterating what Rome secretly is doing, creating a new social order, bringing the world into chaos so as to pave the way for a solution. Problem, reaction, solution. He says this message from Maitreya, channeled through Benjamin Creme, was the voice of Lucifer, also known as the devil. Now, many Christians can accept that this so-called Lord Maitreya is none other than Satan himself. But the Bible tells us that the dragon, that is Satan, Lucifer, gave the Pope his seat and power and great authority. What I'm trying to say in short is, this so-called Lord Maitreya and the Pope are on the same page. They're cut of the same diabolical stone. The author continues, he says, "It's a fascinating coincidence indeed that, quote-unquote, Maitreya talks about a time of, quote, awakening to the need for and the possibility of change, unquote, socially, spiritually, and economically." I find this fascinating because Barack Obama's entire presidential campaign was based on the mantra of change. Mr. Obama has even told the world, quote, "A change has come," unquote. You want to know what that change is? It's the New World Order, the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. Now he continues, he says, what is also interesting is Benjamin Creme's use of the expression bringing, quote-unquote, governments to their knees. This is almost exactly what Bill Moyers on PBS said concerning his interview with William K. Black, the former senior U.S. banking regulator, on April 3rd, 2009. In his commentary on that PBS TV interview with Mr. Black, Moyers said, quote, "The financial industry brought the economy to its knees. The financial industry brought the economy to its knees," unquote. Now, it is true that all the governments of the world are not quite yet on their knees, but most observers would agree that they are stooping very low indeed. Soon we can expect mass unemployment, more homes repossessed, with investments and savings being wiped out. humanity will then be brought to its quote-unquote senses, and the governments of the world to their knees. That will be the sharp shock. That will be that which this demonic entity, Lord Maitreya, has said. Now he says, I have no definite proof, but I can venture to say that this economic crisis is, in all its aspects and phases, part of a greater plan. A kind of quote-unquote controlled demolition to further the quote-unquote grand design. And what is the grand design? The New World Order. Said M.E. Hasselhurst, quote, humanity needs to realize that there is a plan and to recognize its influence in the unfolding world events, unquote. What is that plan? The Roman Catholic Welfare, the Catholic Welfare Conference in 1939 appeared to speak to this. Listen to this. Quote, when the time comes and men realize that the social edifice must be rebuilt according to eternal standards, be it tomorrow or be it centuries from now, the Catholics will arrange to suit. They will, revoking the permit of free thinkers and Jews to celebrate incognito Monday or Saturday on their own account. Respect will not be refused to the Creator. And the author interjects, he's alluding to a Sunday Sabbath here. Nor repose, which means rest, to the creature, which means man, simply for the sake of humoring certain maniacs whose frenetic condition causes them stupidly and insolently to block the will of the whole people. In a word, Catholic society will be Catholic, and the dissenters whom it will tolerate will know its charity, but not be allowed to disrupt its unity. Now let me read that quote again once more through without any interjection, and I'll go through it piece by piece and explain it. You know, I know a little bit about Pope speak, and so does this author, P.D. Stewart. But remember, this quote is speaking of this plan, this New World Order, and this quote comes from the Catholic Welfare Conference in 1939. Here's what it said. When the time comes and men realize that the social edifice must be rebuilt according to eternal standards, be it tomorrow or be it centuries from now, the Catholics will arrange to suit. They will, revoking the permit of free thinkers and Jews to celebrate incognito Monday or Saturday on their own account. Respect will not be refused to the Creator, nor repose to the creature, simply for the sake of humoring certain maniacs whose frenetic condition causes them stupidly and insolently to block the will of the whole people. In a word, Catholic society will be Catholic, and the dissenters whom it will tolerate will know its charity, but not be allowed to disrupt its unity. Unquote. Now let me bring it down. This is a Catholic Welfare Conference. This is Pope speak, and we need to understand it. When the time comes, and this assumes that there will be a time, because after all, it is the Vatican that's orchestrating this. When the time comes and men realize that the social edifice must be rebuilt, in other words, the time is going to come, the Roman Catholic Church is going to make it come, and the target is the social edifice. They're going to destroy it, bring it into chaos so that it can be rebuilt. And it's going to be rebuilt according to eternal standards as defined by the Vatican, not by the Word of God. It's going to be rebuilt according to eternal standards. Remember, it is the dragon who gave him his power and seat and great authority, and he seeks to usurp the authority and throne of God Almighty, and he calls his social order an eternal social order, a divine social order. But it runs diametrically counter to God's law. Okay? And he says, be it tomorrow or be it centuries from now, remember, the Roman Catholic Church won't end until Christ brings it down. So they know that time is on their side. Be it tomorrow or centuries from now, the Catholics will arrange to suit. In other words, this new social order will be arranged by Catholics. And they will, revoking the permit of free thinkers. In other words, anybody who thinks contrary to the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Catholic social order, be they Jews or free thinkers, to celebrate incognito or in secret Monday or Saturday. Monday just means celebrate any day they choose. And Saturday being the Sabbath of the Jews, we're talking about Sabbath observance here, celebrating incognito on their own account. Respect will not be refused to the Creator. Now, the Vatican changed the Sabbath. This is a matter of historical record. In 328 A.D., they changed the solemnity of Sabbath to Sunday, the first day of the week. There's no scriptural authority in the Bible for a change of Sabbath from the seventh day to Sunday. There's no scriptural authority for it. And anybody who studies their Bible and studies history is well aware of this. Sunday is not the Sabbath of God Almighty. It is a Roman counterfeit, and it is consistent with the day venerated by the pagan nations, of which the Jews even tried to emulate, as we see in Ezekiel chapter 8. Now it says, respect will not be refused to the Creator. In other words, everyone is going to have to pay their respects to Sunday. That's what the Roman Catholic Church calls the Lord's Sabbath. Well, who's the Lord of that Sabbath? Not Christ, but Antichrist. Okay, Sunday is the day that they now attribute to the Creator. But the Creator didn't change it. Rome did. So here's another example where the papacy has asserted itself into God's throne, calling itself Creator. It's going to determine what Sabbath the world respects. Respect will not be refused to the Creator, and the author includes in brackets his opinion of this, which is exactly like mine. He is alluding to a Sabbath, a day of rest. The issue is going to be what day is observed by the world as the day of rest. Respect will not be refused to the Creator, nor repose, which means rest, to the creature, which means man, simply for the sake of humoring certain maniacs whose frenetic condition causes them stupidly and insolently to block the will of the whole people. So what's the will of the whole people? Catholic, Sunday, Roman Catholic social order, the New World Order. And anybody who resists that, anybody who insolently objects, will not be able to block the will of this whole world. And it says, in a word, Catholic society will be Catholic, and the dissenters, that is, those like me, whom it will tolerate, will know its charity, but not be allowed to disrupt its unity. What that simply means is people like me, if we're not killed in the name of this God in Rome, we will only be tolerated. And if we continue to live, it will only be by the charity of this global church that is now being called for officially. And I'll get to this maybe tomorrow on the broadcast. Tony Blair, the recent convert to Roman Catholicism, which I believe he's been a Roman all of his life, but he's now calling for a world church. A recent converter to the Roman Catholic cult is now calling for a global church. And I'll read that article tomorrow. It was sent in from one of my listeners. But he's on board with the Pope. And we will only be tolerated. And if we live, it will be by the charity of the Roman Catholic world. It will only be by the mercy of the Roman Catholic world that they're creating. But even whether we live or whether we die, we will not be able to disrupt this new coming unity that they seek. Dissenting will be put down by whatever means at their disposal. And that is the Inquisition that I talk about so frequently here on the program. Inquisition update. That's what they intend to do. They intend to repeat history. This new world order of the Pope is going to take its final form. And God's people, as always, are going to suffer unless they're delivered by a miraculous hand. The same miraculous hand that delivered the Jews from the Egyptian bondage of Pharaoh. Now, the author, P.D. Stewart, continues. Yes, intelligent reader, the Vatican has a solution to the world's economic woes, and it involves a redistribution of wealth and a day of rest, the latter of which we shall shortly explore. Now, if you're a regular listener to Inquisition Update, you've heard the dissertation that Richard Bennett did on the Pope's encyclical Caritas in Veritate, which means charity in truth, and Rome always defines her terms. Charity means the global redistribution of the world's wealth, and truth means every man, woman, and child on the planet must comply. And the United Nations, the new governing body of the world for the Pope, is going to enforce it. And the nations of the world are going to assist. Okay? The global redistribution of the world, the wealth of the world, everyone included. That's what Caritas in Veritate means. That was a papal encyclical, the highest authority writing that the papacy issues. No one need ask anymore who is the head of the head of the head of the New World Order. It's now a matter of public record. No one needs to wonder anymore who the biblical Antichrist is. Now, chapter 13 of this book is entitled Dividing the Spoils, How Governments Came to Own the Banks. We're going to start talking about this bank collapse, try to make more sense out of it. It begins with a cartoonish photo of the red, white, and blue hat that Uncle Sam wears, we're all familiar with. And out of it is raining Federal Reserve notes. Okay, and the caption of this photograph says, "Our wallet is empty. Many of our banks have closed, and our credit is dried up, but we can still print money," unquote. The author continues, trillions of dollars of public money given to a few private banks. Money simply printed out of thin air with no backing in gold or real assets of wealth. America has been printing money like a banana republic. It is the largest Ponzi scheme ever. The big bailed out banks can now lend the American taxpayers their own money back with interest. This is a corrupt system. Absolutely corrupt. God never intended man to live this way. That's why he gave us order in the financial world. Gold, real assets, silver, and a fair balance. Anything else is theft, a violation of God's holy law. And nobody could describe what is happening in the financial world today as anything but theft. Now, the author continues, he says, 21 megabanks received $33.56 billion in 2008 under a scheme whereby the federal government bought into these banks as a part owner. This, according to Associated Press article dated November 18, 2008, in Washington, D.C. And although the presidents, that is Bush and Obama, and the United States Treasury bailed out their chosen banks, the banks are generally still in trouble. Professor Niall Ferguson, a Brit and Harvard professor of economics, has shown in his PBS documentary, The Ascent of Money, issuing some very graphic examples, the folly of what we have seen in the bailout of American banks, along with the absurdity of trying to fix the problem with more of the same, by debt-based fiat currency created out of thin air, simply by lending it into existence. This is financial wizardry of the Madoff variety. The quote-unquote stimulus plans of Messrs. Bush and Obama, their so-called bailouts, giveaways to banks, call it what you will devalue the United States currency. Such massive cash injections into an economy will naturally double the money base in a very, very short time without any growth in production or national wealth. Some banks were deliberately allowed to fail. Why did the federal government allow two of the largest mortgage lenders, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, fail after waiting until they lost 60% of the value of their shares? Together, these two companies had loaned $5 trillion in mortgages, but in the space of weeks, they were taken over by the United States federal government, nationalized. As America goes, so goes the world. Similar nationalizations occurred in the UK and other European countries like Belgium, who either nationalized or partially nationalized their banks. And Bear Stearns was gone in less than 7 days, bankrupt, and sold to J.P. Morgan at a distressed sale of $10 per share. And Lehman Brothers were purposely allowed to fold by Hank Henry Paulson. He knew the result would be a financial meltdown, and he allowed it to happen, then gave every appearance that he was trying to stop it. As Bill Moyers said in the opening remarks of an interview with William Black, quote, "The best way to rob a bank is to own one," unquote. Why do I say this? Read another short excerpt from the PBS interview of William T. Black and Bill Moyers, from which I quoted earlier, on how the United States government, through its deregulation of financial markets and banking practices, oversaw the growth of the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Black. Well, the way that you do it is to make really bad loans because they pay better. Then you grow extremely rapidly. In other words, you're a Ponzi-like scheme. Black continues. He says, "Oh, Bernie was a piker." He's speaking of Bernie Madoff. "Oh, Bernie was a piker. He doesn't even get into the front ranks of a Ponzi scheme." And I see we've run out of time. We'll begin tomorrow on the broadcast with this dialogue between William K. Black and Bill Moyers talking about the orchestrated collapse of our financial institution for the purpose of changing the social order of not only the United States, but of the world. The end game is a Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, a new government, a new religion, a new economic system, all headed up by the Pope. We'll see you tomorrow.